Dust whipped across the open plains like angry spirits refusing to settle. The wind moaned low over the hills, rattling the fence posts and bending the tall, brittle grass. Somewhere out past the mesquite brush, a storm was gathering. But to Colt McAllister, it wasn't the kind that came with thunder. It was the kind that crept into your bones when the land gave nothing and the debts came calling. Colt tugged the brim of his hat lower against the wind, boots grinding in the dirt as he loaded the last of the firewood onto the wagon. His ranch, if you could still call it that, was barely holding together. 3 cattle gone this month, the well half dry, and no one left to help since his brother had taken off for the silver mines out west. Colt had only one thing going for him. He was too stubborn to quit. He climbed into the wagon, gave a click of his tongue, and the mule started down the trail toward Dry Creek. The town was 10 miles off, but he needed supplies. And maybe, if luck showed mercy, a buyer for one of the few steers still standing. What he didn't expect was to find her. The first sign was a hawk circling above the ridge, its cry sharp and sudden. Then, just past a bend near the abandoned logging trail, he spotted the glint of metal. Not from a gun, but from a belt buckle catching the light. A woman lay beside a scorched tree, her arms curled protectively around her middle, her face smeared with dirt and dried blood. Colt jumped down. "Ma'am?" he called, hands out to show he meant no harm. She didn't move, not until he got close enough to see that one eye was open, watching him like a rattler might. "I'm not dying out here," she rasped, her voice low and rough as gravel. "So if you're here to finish the job, you better make it quick." Colt blinked. "Ma'am, I'm not here to hurt you." She tried to sit up, but her body betrayed her with a wince. Colt knelt beside her. "You're safe. I've got a wagon just over the hill. Can you walk?" She gave him a long look, weighing him. "Depends. Can you carry me if I can't?" He chuckled, a dry, quiet sound. "Reckon I could." He lifted her carefully, surprised at how light she was. Wiry, all muscle and scars, like someone who'd lived through a fight and was still halfway in one. Her hair was dark and tangled, her clothes torn from brush and God knew what else. But her eyes burned, fierce, intelligent, and deeply distrustful. They rode in silence. "What's your name?" he asked finally. She didn't answer. He tried again. "Mine's Colt. Colt McAllister. Rancher. Or at least trying to be." She looked off into the hills. "I've been called many things. Most folks just call me Too Fierce." Colt raised a brow. "That a name or a warning?" "Both." He didn't press her further. Something told him she'd talk when she was good and ready. And maybe not even then. When they reached the ranch, Colt helped her down and led her into the small cabin he called home. It wasn't much. Just a single room with a wood stove, a battered cot, and the smell of years-old cedar. But it was warm, and it was his. He poured her water. She drank like she hadn't in days. "Who left you out there?" he asked. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "People who thought I was too much trouble. They tried to break me. Didn't work." Colt nodded slowly. "No, I don't reckon it did." She looked at him then, eyes softening just a hair. "You don't seem like much trouble. You poor?" He blinked. "That's one way of putting it." "Good," she said. "Then maybe you won't try to buy me." He wasn't sure whether to laugh or curse. But one thing was certain. Whoever she was, whatever past she carried, she wasn't meant to be owned. And he wasn't looking to own anyone. Just maybe not be alone in this fight. The night came down like a thick wool blanket, heavy and still. Colt sat by the stove, poking at the embers while the woman, still without a name, rested in the cot, wrapped in one of his old blankets. Her wounds had been cleaned as best as he could manage, and the worst of the bleeding had stopped. But the fire in her eyes had not dimmed. She hadn't spoken much since sundown, only offered him one clear request. "Don't ask questions you ain't ready to hear the answers to." Fair enough. He'd seen enough in life to respect boundaries, even ones drawn in silence. Still, as the logs cracked and the wind scratched at the windows, curiosity tugged at him like a loose thread. "You should eat," Colt said gently, setting down a plate of beans and cornbread near her side of the room. She didn't move for a long while. Then finally, she reached for the plate, ate like a woman used to rationing, methodical, suspicious of good fortune. He leaned back in his chair. "You're tough, I'll give you that. I've had practice. Practice don't always mean peace." She met his eyes for a moment. "Peace ain't never meant safety. Not for someone like me." Colt tilted his head. "Someone like you?" She paused. "Someone they can't control." He nodded slowly. "That why they left you out there?" A flicker of something dark passed across her face. That's why they tried to leave me. Colt didn't push it further. He watched the fire burn low and turned the conversation elsewhere. You got a place to go? Kin? Friends? She let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Friends don't last long. And kin, let's just say if they were still around, I wouldn't be sleeping in a stranger's cabin. Well, Colt said, his voice low and steady, it ain't much, but you can stay here till you're strong enough to ride. Her gaze narrowed. And then what? You send me off into the hills? Back to the men who chained me? I ain't sending you anywhere, he said. You leave when you want, or don't. That's your call. She stared at him like she was trying to find the trick in his words. When she didn't, she settled back, finished the last bite of cornbread, and leaned her head against the wall. You got a lot of nerve offering shelter without terms, cowboy. I've been broke long enough to know folks ain't currency. She smiled then. Small, quick, gone before it really landed. I'll tell you something, she said quietly, since you didn't ask. Colt nodded. All right. My name's Savannah. He repeated it softly. Savannah. Don't use it too often. You might jinx yourself. He chuckled under his breath. I've lived through droughts, wildfires, and 2 busted ribs from a stubborn bull. I think I'll take my chances. Savannah looked at him again, really looked this time, and Colt felt something shift in the room. Not love, not yet, but a recognition, a shared ache, a kind of alignment only born from hardship. Suddenly she stiffened. Her hand went to her side where a small hunting knife was hidden in the folds of the blanket. Colt didn't move, just followed her eyes toward the window. Then he heard it too, hoofbeats. Too many for comfort, and not the sound of ranchers heading home. Savannah's voice was a whisper. They found me. Colt stood slowly, stepping to the wall where his rifle leaned. His jaw set, his voice even. Then let's see if they remember you the way they should. The hoofbeats grew louder, their rhythm steady, confident. The sound of men who weren't hiding. Colt stepped outside, rifle slung casually across his shoulder, though every part of him was coiled like a spring. Savannah stood just inside the doorway, silhouetted by the firelight, her knife gripped behind her thigh. 3 riders broke the ridge, silhouettes cut against the rising moon. Dust curled around their horses' legs as they slowed, not bothering to call out. Colt recognized the middle one. Thick build, square jaw, long oilskin coat. Eldon Carrick. Used to run with the cattle rustlers who'd nearly bled the valley dry 2 winters back. Word had it he'd gone legit after a jail stint. But if that were true, the buzzard circling overhead was a cardinal. Colt didn't move. Evening, Carrick. Eldon gave a lazy smile. Evening, McAllister. We're looking for someone. Came up the ridge, saw smoke. Thought we'd check if you'd had unexpected company. Colt didn't blink. You're on my land, and you're avoiding the question. Savannah stepped forward then, just enough that the lamplight caught the edge of her face. You found me, Carrick. Say what you came to say. Eldon's smile slipped. Didn't think you'd crawl this far. Thought we left you too far gone to rise. Should have left me 6 feet under if you wanted me quiet. Colt's grip on the rifle tightened. Eldon clicked his tongue. This don't concern you, McAllister. She's got debts. Made promises she didn't keep. She ain't yours to collect on. She's dangerous. Good, Colt said, his voice dropping. Then maybe she belongs here. Carrick's horse shifted, sensing the tension. One of his men moved his hand toward his holster, but Colt's rifle was already at his shoulder. You make a move, Colt warned, and you'll find out how fierce 2 of us can be. A silence stretched, taut as wire. Then Carrick smirked and raised his hands. This ain't the end. She owes men with long memories. And they're gonna come calling, cowboy. You just bought yourself a world of trouble. I already live in it, Colt said. Now ride on. Eldon Carrick stared a moment longer, then gave a nod to his men. The 3 horses turned slowly, retreating into the dark. When the dust had settled and the sound of hooves faded into the hills, Colt lowered the rifle. Savannah stood still, breathing hard, face unreadable. He looked at her. Want to tell me what that was about? She answered without looking at him. They were the first to try and tame me. Thought they could use my strength for their game. When I said no, they branded me a threat. Colt nodded slowly. Well, they're right about that part. She finally looked at him, something sparking behind her tired eyes. I'm not looking to be saved, she said. I'm not looking to save you, Colt replied. Just figured you might want someone who'd stand beside you instead of behind. The words hung between them, weighty and unexpected. She didn't answer, not with words. She walked past him, back inside the cabin, but she didn't close the door. Morning rolled in like it always did in the high desert. Sharp, bright, and too honest. The sun pierced through the small window of Colt's cabin, landing across Savannah's face as she stirred under the thin blanket. She didn't startle. She never startled. Just opened her eyes slowly, like a wolf checking its territory. Colt had already been up an hour, splitting kindling behind the shed, the rhythmic crack of axe meeting wood echoing off the trees. It was his way of thinking or avoiding thinking, depending on the morning. But today his mind couldn't avoid her, the woman asleep in his home, the danger she brought with her, and the way she stood beside him the night before, not as a burden, but as someone who knew how to brace when things cracked. Savannah stepped out, boots crunching over frost-laced dirt. She didn't say good morning, just nodded at the woodpile. "You swing an axe like you mean it," she said. Colt leaned on the handle. "Don't see the point in doing anything halfway." She bent down, picked up a few logs, and carried them to the cabin without being asked. That was the start of the rhythm. Unspoken, simple, quiet. She never asked to stay, and Colt never asked when she'd leave. She began helping without warning, patching fence lines, boiling coffee, cleaning the old rifle he kept behind the stove. One evening, as they sat by the fire sipping from mismatched tin cups, Savannah finally asked the question Colt had been expecting since the start. "Why'd you help me?" He stirred the ashes with a stick, watching the orange light crackle. "Seemed like the right thing." "That simple?" "No," he said honestly. "But it's where I started." She didn't push for more. She just nodded. Then said, "When I was 15, my father told me I was born with fire in me. Said it'd either make me a leader or get me burned alive." Colt didn't interrupt. "I chose wrong people for too long," she said quietly. "Thought I could outfight them all, until they left me out there to rot." He met her gaze. They didn't know what kind of storm they walked away from. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "You talk like a man who's walked through fire, too." Colt didn't smile back. "Everyone out here's burned, one way or another. Question is what you do after." They both went silent again. The fire popped. That night, while Colt slept in the chair with his hat pulled low, Savannah lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She'd survived worse. But this place, this man, it made the silence feel different. Not like loneliness, but rest. She wasn't sure how long she could stay. But for now, the fire didn't feel like it was coming for her. For now, she was warming her hands beside it. Days passed like grains through a dry hourglass, slow but constant. Savannah found herself settling into Colt's world without meaning to. The cabin that once felt like a temporary hideout now carried the rhythm of something steadier. Not safety. She wasn't naive, but steadier. They worked in tandem. She checked the fences while Colt patched the roof. She rode into the hills for water while he bartered with the storekeep in Dry Creek. Neither one said what was happening between them, but it filled the space between glances and the way they handed tools without speaking. One afternoon, Colt rode back from town slower than usual. His horse kicked up dust as he came down the trail, head low beneath the summer heat. Savannah met him at the edge of the corral, wiping sweat from her brow. "You look like trouble caught up to you," she said, half smiling. He swung down from the saddle, but his face didn't mirror her humor. "Carrick's been talking. Word's out you're alive. Some men rode in from the south asking about a wild woman who doesn't die easy." Savannah's smile faded. "Did you give them what they wanted?" "No," Colt said. "But the storekeep's nervous. Said they'll be back. Maybe more of them." She looked past the barn, out toward the wide open plains. It would have been easy to run again, vanish into the canyons like before. She'd done it more than once, but this time her feet didn't itch the same way. She looked back at Colt. "I don't run anymore," she said. He didn't ask if she was sure. He just said, "Then we better be ready." That night, Colt unlocked the old trunk beneath his bed, a relic from his father's time, and pulled out a second rifle. He handed it to her without a word. She took it, checked the chamber, and cleaned it by firelight while the wind whispered against the windows like someone trying to get in. As she worked, Colt finally broke the silence. "I lost my father to a land dispute," he said. "Big ranchers moved in, claimed water rights that weren't theirs. He stood up to them. Sheriff looked the other way." Savannah listened, her hands never stopping. "They shot him in front of my mother. Burned the fields. We had nothing after that." Her eyes flicked up. "What happened to your mother?" "She held on a few years. Died from a cold and heartbreak." "I'm sorry." He nodded. "I was 16. Swore I'd never owe another man a damn thing. Built all this from what was left. Scrap lumber, patched land, and my own fists. She stared at him for a long moment, then said softly, "You ever think about leaving it all behind?" "Every day," he said. "But something keeps me." She raised a brow. "Hope?" "No," Colt answered. "Stubbornness. And now, maybe something else." Their eyes met. The fire crackled between them, the shadows dancing on the walls. Outside, the wind shifted direction. It carried dust, the distant sound of hooves, and something else neither of them said aloud. It was coming, but this time they wouldn't face it alone. The next morning, Colt marked the fence line with fresh wire. Not because the cattle were wandering, most had been sold or lost, but because it gave his hands something to do while his mind churned. Savannah sat atop a fence post nearby, polishing the rifle with quiet precision. She didn't say much, but Colt could tell the tension in her shoulders had returned. The peace of their odd partnership was thinning, like smoke before a storm. "They'll come from the west," she said flatly. Colt paused, resting his boot on a fence rail. "Why the west?" "There's a ridge," she explained. "Steep descent with a blind curve. Men like Carrick always take the route that looks like power." He nodded, noting it. "We could post up near the old cottonwoods. Good cover." "I'll ride out there at dusk," she said. "Check the ground for prints." He studied her. Not just her words, but the calm way she spoke them. Savannah wasn't just surviving anymore. She was planning, standing her ground. Not a woman on the run, but a woman ready to fight for where she was. He'd seen that kind of fire once before, in his mother's eyes, the night she refused to leave the farm even when flames licked the tree line. "You know," Colt said quietly, "I've seen men stare down barrels with less courage than you sharpen a knife." She smirked. "That's supposed to be a compliment." "Not sure, but I meant it." That evening they rode together to the ridge. The sun dipped low, bleeding orange over the plains as birds scattered into the trees. Savannah dismounted first, crouching low to the dust. Her fingers brushed over faint hoof marks, still soft at the edges. "They were here," she whispered, 2 days back, circling. Colt stepped beside her. "Scouting, or testing to see if I'd run." They shared a look, and something passed between them, a silent vow. On the ride back, Savannah was the first to speak. "I used to believe strength meant being alone, meant no one could touch you, break you, steer you." Colt listened. "But that kind of strength, it's cold, hollow, like a wall that holds no one inside." "What changed your mind?" She turned in the saddle to face him. "You didn't treat me like a broken thing." He gave her a small, warm glance. "Because you're not." They reached the cabin just as the moon rose. Savannah walked the perimeter, checking for movement. Colt watched her, the way she moved with purpose, with certainty. Later, as they sat beside the fire, she laid the rifle across her lap and said, "They'll be back. And when they come, they'll expect me to stand alone." Colt's voice was quiet but firm. "Then they're not ready for what happens when I stand with you." She didn't respond with words. She reached over and laid her calloused hand over his. Her grip was strong, unshaking. Outside, the wind rustled the pines, carrying the scent of gun oil and dust. Inside, 2 souls that had walked through fire leaned just a little closer to the flame, not to be consumed, but to be lit from within. The moon was high and full the night they came. It started with silence. Too much of it. The kind that pressed against your ears, that told you something was watching from just beyond the firelight. Then came the faint crunch of a boot on dry leaves. 1, then 2. Savannah and Colt were already awake, sitting in silence by the dying fire. Neither had slept. They didn't need words to know it was time. Colt handed her the rifle. "Window." She nodded, already moving. He stepped to the doorway, cracked it open slowly, eyes scanning the tree line. Shadows shifted near the edge of the corral. 4 figures, maybe 5. Not charging, just watching. Trying to intimidate. "I count 6, Savannah whispered, crouched by the window, rifle steady. "Same," Colt muttered. "Carrick's not with them." "Coward." Colt's lips curled slightly. "He sends others to do the bleeding." The lead figure stepped forward into the moonlight. A younger man with long, dark hair and a cocky stance. He held his rifle like a stage prop, not a weapon. Too clean, too certain. "McAllister," he called, voice echoing. "We don't want no trouble. Just hand over the girl and we'll be on our way." Colt stepped out onto the porch. "There's no girl here, just a woman you don't want to meet twice." Laughter echoed from the shadows. One of the men fired a warning shot into the air. Savannah's voice cut through the crack of the rifle. "That the best you've got?" Then she fired. The shot rang out and splintered the fence post 3 feet from the cocky man's boot. He jumped back with a curse, scrambling for cover. That's when the fight began. Gunfire lit the darkness in flashes. Colt ducked behind the porch beam, squeezing off shots with slow, focused breath. Savannah shifted positions with practiced ease, covering angles, never missing twice. They didn't try to kill. Not yet, but they made it clear this ranch wasn't going to fold. Two of Carrick's men took hits, one to the shoulder, one to the leg, and the rest scattered back into the trees like coyotes learning their first lesson in fire. When it was over, the land fell back into breathless silence. Colt stood in the open, his shirt soaked in sweat, the rifle still warm in his hands. Savannah stepped out from the cabin slowly, checking the horizon. Her chest rose and fell, not from fear, but from focus. She turned to him. "They'll be back. Next time more of them, and worse." Colt nodded. "Then we keep pushing back." She studied him, lips tight. "You're not obligated to this, Colt." He wiped the sweat from his brow. "Neither are you." She stared at him for a long second, then finally said, "I think I was born for this." "What, fighting?" "No," Savannah said, standing beside someone who doesn't flinch. He didn't move toward her, just stood still, letting the quiet carry the weight between them. The fire hadn't won, but it had scorched something old, something brittle. And in its place, something was beginning to grow, not just loyalty, not just trust, but something deeper. The morning after the gunfire, the ranch sat quiet under a thick haze, the kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful, just waiting. Colt saddled his horse with tense shoulders, jaw clenched. He didn't speak much as he loaded fresh rounds into the rifle. Savannah watched him from the cabin steps, her arms crossed, boots dusty, eyes unreadable. "They'll regroup," she said. "I know." Carrick doesn't like being embarrassed. "Which means next time it'll be him leading." Colt cinched the saddle tight and gave a sharp tug on the leather strap. His horse stomped once, sensing the tension. Savannah stepped off the porch. "Then maybe it's time we stop waiting for them to choose the place." Colt looked at her. "You suggesting we ride to him?" She gave a half nod. "They're holed up near Black Ridge, old rail camp. I know the way." He raised an eyebrow. "That's a dangerous kind of idea. So is letting them surround us again." He didn't answer right away. Just looked at her long and hard. "You sure you're not running from something else?" he finally asked. Savannah paused. "I used to think revenge was the point. But now, it's about finishing a story they tried to write for me." Colt respected that. He wasn't a man of many causes, but he understood unfinished stories and the weight they carried. They rode out that afternoon. No fanfare, no goodbyes. Just the dry wind, the steady clop of hooves, and the loaded quiet between them. By dusk, they reached the old ridge trail. Broken fence posts lined the path like the bones of failed dreams. The trees here were darker, tighter, like the world was folding in on itself. Savannah pulled up suddenly, holding a fist in the air. Colt stopped beside her. "What is it?" he whispered. She nodded toward the distant slope. "Smoke, just over the rise." Colt squinted. "Campfire." Savannah slid down from her saddle. "They're there. 4 or 5, maybe more. Could be a scout crew or the main group." He dismounted too, crouching beside her behind the rocks. "You sure about this?" Her voice didn't shake. "You still want to know what they tried to do to me?" He met her eyes. "Only if you want to tell it." Savannah took a breath. "They tried to turn me into bait. Said I was too fierce for honest work, but just right to lure in marks. They planned to use me, dress me up, feed me lies, and sell what they didn't own." Colt's fists curled. "And when you said no?" "I broke a bottle over Carrick's head. Took out 2 of them on my way out. That's when they marked me." Colt nodded. "Then we ended." They circled wide around the ridge, careful with every step. Savannah moved like a shadow, silent and certain. Colt followed close, keeping to the trees. As night fell, the flickering campfire came into view. Laughter echoed in the distance. Loud, arrogant, unaware. They weren't ready. Savannah turned to Colt. "We don't need to take them all tonight. Just remind them what happens when they follow a woman too far into her own fire." He gave a slow grin. "Then let's light the match." The moon barely crested the tops of the pines as Colt and Savannah crouched at the edge of the ridge, the campfire crackling below like a spotlight on the men who'd once left her for dead. Savannah's face was unreadable, but her knuckles were white around the grip of her rifle. Down below, 4 men lounged around the fire. They were armed but careless. Laughter too loud, bottles too full, pistols unbuckled. They didn't expect anyone to come looking for them, least of all the woman they'd wronged. Colt whispered, "You sure you want to do this now?" Savannah didn't answer immediately. Then she whispered, "I don't need to kill them, Colt. I just need them to know I'm not afraid anymore." She slipped around to the left flank without another word, her movement smooth and practiced. Colt watched her disappear into the trees, trusting she knew what she was doing and ready to back her every second. 5 minutes passed. Then, just as one of the men stood to relieve himself by the tree line, a shot rang out, not into flesh, but into the fire. Sparks flew up like startled birds, and the men scrambled to their feet in chaos.
Who the hell?
Another shot, this one into a bottle, shattering it in midair. And then her voice came out of the darkness, cold, clear, unwavering. You left me in the dirt, chained, bleeding, and you laughed. Carrick's men froze. The younger one from the standoff near Colt's ranch dropped his pistol, trying to find it in the dark. A third shot. This one clipped the hat off the tallest man. You should have made sure I was dead, Savannah said again. Now you'll sleep knowing I'm watching. A shadow stepped out of the trees. Savannah, silhouetted by firelight, rifle loose at her side. Not raised, not aimed, but deadly all the same. Colt stepped out beside her from the opposite flank. You heard her. This ends tonight. One of the men, the oldest, bearded and wide, raised his hands. We didn't know Carrick was going to do that. We just followed orders. That's the problem, Savannah said flatly. You still do. She stepped closer, now only feet from the fire. I'm not going to shoot you, but the next time I see one of you near my land, there won't be a warning shot, Colt added. Tell Carrick she's not running anymore. She's not alone anymore. The men backed away slowly, no longer brash, no longer laughing. They fled into the darkness, leaving behind their fire, their drink, and their certainty. When they were gone, Savannah stared into the flames for a long moment. Feels strange, she murmured. What does? Letting them go. You didn't let them go, Colt said. You chased them off. With their own fear. She glanced at him. They'll still come, you know that, right? Maybe, Colt said. But next time they won't be looking for a woman they can chain. They'll be looking at a fight they already lost once. They stood in silence for a long time, letting the fire burn down to coals. Then Colt reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small tin box. What's that? She asked. He opened it. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a silver locket, weathered but still shining. Belonged to my mother, he said. She wore it the day she refused to leave the ranch. Said it reminded her who she was before men tried to take it away. Savannah stared at the locket. Why are you showing it to me? Because you remind me of her, he said. Not because you're the same, but because you refused to stay quiet when they wanted you silent. He handed it to her. She didn't take it at first. You're giving me something that matters to you. I'm offering it, Colt said. Only you decide if it matters to you too. Finally, slowly, Savannah took the locket in her hand. She said nothing, but she didn't give it back. The days that followed were quiet. Too quiet, like the air was holding its breath. Colt repaired a broken gate hinge while Savannah tended to the small garden she'd insisted on planting behind the cabin. It was barely more than a few rows of stubborn beans and hopeful carrots, but she checked on it each morning like it was sacred. You ever grown anything before? Colt asked one afternoon, watching her dig her fingers into the soil. Savannah gave a shrug. Nothing that didn't fight back. He grinned. These'll fight too, just in slow motion. They shared more moments like that. Small ones. Peaceful ones. The kind that had once felt impossible to her. She still woke with her hand near her knife some mornings, but fewer now. Her dreams had softened around the edges. And Colt? He wasn't sure when exactly her presence had stopped feeling temporary, but he'd catch himself reaching for a second mug of coffee without thinking, watching the sun rise with the kind of quiet hope he hadn't let himself feel in years. But peace never holds forever on the frontier. Late one evening, as the light died behind the hills, a rider approached. Colt saw him from the ridge and raised his rifle, but the figure didn't carry himself like a threat. He dismounted slow, hands raised, and called out with a voice worn from sun and miles. Name's Merritt, he said. I'm not here for blood. Colt kept the rifle raised. Then you've already started better than most. Savannah stepped beside Colt, eyes sharp. The rider continued. I came with a message. Carrick's gone south, but he left others behind. Men who ain't loyal to him, just to the bounty on her head. Savannah's jaw tightened. How much? Too much, Merritt said. Enough to bring ghosts out of the canyons, but some of us don't like the smell of what's being hunted. Colt lowered the rifle just slightly. Why tell us? Because I've buried sisters, Merritt said simply. And you deserve warning. He handed Colt a folded map, marked with small red X's. They've circled this whole stretch of land. But you've got time, maybe a week. Thought you'd use it better than they expect. Then he turned, mounted his horse, and rode off without asking for water, coin, or shelter. Savannah took the map in her hands, fingers tracing the ink. They want me for something I won't give. Colt stepped closer. What's that? She looked up at him. Silence. He nodded. Then let's make some noise. That night they sat on the porch in the dark. No fire. No lanterns. Just the sky, full of stars and promise. I used to think I was a storm, she whispered, that I'd just blow through lives, leave them in pieces. You're not a storm, Colt said softly. You're a frontier, wild, untamed, and full of something worth crossing through hell to find. She looked at him. Do you mean that? I've never meant anything more in my life. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then she leaned her head gently against his shoulder. Not because she was tired, but because she was safe. The calm didn't last. Just before dawn, Colt spotted the first column of smoke rising in the direction of Dry Creek. Not wide like a brush fire, narrower, focused, controlled. The kind of smoke made when someone sets something alight. Intentionally. Savannah stepped out of the cabin as he saddled the horse. What is it? She asked, already tightening the belt of her coat. Dry Creek's burning. Or something near it, Colt muttered, cinching the last strap. Savannah was already at her saddle. You think it's a warning? Colt nodded grimly. If they wanted you quietly gone, they'd never start a blaze. This is meant to be loud. By the time they reached the rise overlooking town, the fire had thinned to thick smoke, curling off the remnants of the old livery stable. The roof had collapsed inward, embers still glowing like the last breath of something once useful. The townsfolk were gathered at a distance. Colt counted a dozen, mostly men with tired eyes, mothers holding children close, and Sheriff Dwyer standing stiff with his arms crossed. Dwyer spotted them as they rode in. You bring this trouble, McAllister? He called. Colt didn't flinch. You think I burned your livery from 15 miles away? The sheriff spat into the dirt. Word is you're harboring a woman Carrick wants. Savannah slid off her horse before Colt could stop her. And what do you want, Sheriff? She said, her voice cool and steady. For Carrick to write your laws, too? Dwyer eyed her carefully. I don't answer to Carrick. Then prove it. The townspeople murmured. Some looked away. One older man, Amos Wilkes, who ran the general store, finally stepped forward. Sheriff, he said, voice low but firm. We've known Colt since he was a boy, and if he says someone's hunting him, we ought to listen. Dwyer shifted uncomfortably but gave a stiff nod. I'll put 2 men on watch at the southern road. That's all I can spare. It'll help, Colt said, but we'll handle what's coming. As the crowd began to scatter, Amos turned to Savannah. I heard what they say about you, he said, but that ain't the woman I'm seeing now. She looked him square in the eye. Then maybe you're the first to see clearly. They rode back to the ranch under a sky thick with smoke and tension. At the cabin, Colt spread the map Merritt had left across the table. He marked the new burn site with charcoal and studied the pattern. They're moving faster, he said, trying to box us in. Savannah leaned over his shoulder, tracing her finger along a small ridge line to the east. We hit them first, she said. Not to kill, just to stop the next fire before it starts. Colt turned to her, searching her face. You sure this is what you want? She met his gaze without hesitation. I'm done running. I was meant to stand for something. I just never thought it'd be with someone like you. He gave a faint smile. Someone like me? A man who didn't try to fix me, just made space beside him. He reached out and took her hand, rough fingers curling around hers. No one stands beside me unless they choose to. You made that choice. Now I make mine. And in that moment, they weren't just planning strategy. They were planning to protect something neither of them ever thought they'd have again. A home. 2 nights later, the storm broke. Not from the sky, but from the hills. Colt had just finished laying fresh sandbags along the western fence. Savannah, eyes sharp beneath the brim of her hat, stood near the barn with her rifle slung low and a second pistol on her hip. The dogs barked first. Then came the rustle. Not of deer, not of wind, but of boots trying not to be heard. They're here, Savannah said, voice low but steady. Colt checked the rifle, nodded once. Positions? You take the water tower. I'll cover the path through the pines. They split like clockwork, no panic, just purpose. 20 minutes passed before the first shadow crept past the outer posts. Savannah didn't fire, not yet. She let them move, let them think the dark would hide them. She counted 4, then 6. One with a torch, another carrying a coil of rope. Colt's voice rang out sharp from the tower. Drop it! The man with the torch froze. I said drop it. You light anything on my land and you'll be using that rope to drag your dead back down the hill. One of the men laughed, the same cocky one from the last encounter. You ain't got enough bullets to stop us all. Savannah stepped from the shadows. That's true. They turned toward her, just in time to see the firelight glint off her rifle. But I've got enough aim to make the first 3 of you wish you'd picked a softer woman. No one moved. Then a voice, unfamiliar, broke the standoff. Hold. A tall, grizzled figure emerged from the rear. Not Carrick. Older. Sterner. His duster flapped like a flag, his expression unreadable. Savannah's brow furrowed. "Who's that?" Colt whispered from above. "That ain't one of Carrick's. That man rides alone." The figure stepped forward into view. "Savannah Gray," he said. "You don't know me, but I knew your father." That stopped her cold. "My name's Emery Vance. Your father and I rode together in the border war. He saved my life in the Red Fork ambush, more than once." Savannah's jaw clenched. "And now you're here to collect on some imagined debt?" "No." Emery shook his head slowly. "I'm here because I heard what Carrick's doing, and I don't stand for men who make coin off shackles." The men behind him exchanged uneasy glances. "You follow him?" Savannah asked. "They did. Until tonight," Emery said, turning slightly. "You men can ride back south, or you can stay and bleed for a coward who sends you after a woman with more backbone than all of you put together." For a long second, no one moved. Then, one by one, they stepped back. Some dropped their weapons. Others just turned their backs and walked toward the dark. Within minutes, the ridge was empty save for the wind and the sound of a dozen bad decisions unraveling. Emery Vance tipped his hat. "You don't need my protection, Miss Gray. But I figured you deserved to know not everyone forgot who your father was." Savannah blinked. "He's been gone a long time. But what he stood for, that kind of thing outlives a man." With that, he turned, mounted his horse, and rode off without another word. Colt came down from the tower, slow and thoughtful. "You all right?" he asked. Savannah exhaled. "I don't know." But she looked stronger, taller, like something inside her had just clicked into place. "He wasn't wrong," Colt said. "About what?" "About what you stand for." She turned to Colt, her eyes soft in the night. "And what do you stand for, Colt McAllister?" He didn't smile, didn't need to. "You." The following week unfolded like the last breath before lightning strikes. Dry Creek stayed quiet. Too quiet. No more riders. No more smoke. The kind of quiet that didn't bring peace. Only delay. Colt and Savannah worked as if on borrowed time, repairing fences, stacking provisions, checking the sight lines around the ranch. They spoke less, but when they did, it carried weight. Not fear, focus. One evening, just after dusk, Colt lit the old lantern that hung on the porch beam. The soft golden light pooled at his boots while he watched Savannah come up from the barn. Dust streaked across her jaw, sleeves rolled to the elbow. "You've been working like we've already lost," he said gently. She glanced at him, then sat on the porch steps with a soft grunt. "No, I've been working like I intend to win." He handed her the canteen. She took a slow drink and leaned her head against the beam beside him. "Carrick's waiting," she said. "He's not done, just letting fear do the slow work. He'll push again." Savannah gave a small nod. "And next time, it won't be hired hands with nothing to lose. It'll be the ones who know how to break ribs with the back of a rifle." Colt looked out at the land. "Then we change the game." "How?" "We stop letting him pick the time and place." Savannah tilted her head. "You've got a plan?" He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. A map, inked with small X's, trails, ridges. "Emery left more than a warning," Colt said. "He gave us their fallback point, a canyon they use for regrouping west of Blind Mesa." Savannah studied it, eyes narrowing. "If we ride in at night, we could catch them thin." "We don't need to take them all," Colt replied. "Just Carrick. Cut the head off the snake." Savannah was quiet for a long moment. "He won't expect me to come to him." "Exactly." She stood, rolled her sleeves down slowly, and buckled her gun belt tighter. "I never thought I'd say this," she murmured, "but I'm tired of being hunted. It's time he learns what it feels like to be cornered." That night they made preparations. Colt packed lightly, just the essentials: 2 rifles, extra rounds, dry food, and a locket tucked safely in the saddlebag. Savannah cleaned each weapon like ritual, her movements steady and precise. As they finished, she looked up at Colt. "You scared?" He considered it, then said, "Yes, because I've got something to lose now." She didn't tease him, didn't smirk, just stepped close, resting her hand against his chest. "You won't lose me," she whispered. "Not this time." Their kiss was not hurried, not desperate. It was the kind born of trust earned, not taken. A promise passed between 2 hearts worn down by life but still beating like thunder. When they broke apart, Colt said, "Let's ride before the dawn betrays us." And they did. 2 silhouettes cutting west through the dark, moving like wind before a storm. But this time the storm had names, and Carrick wouldn't see it coming. The desert was quiet, but not still. As dawn edged across the horizon, turning the canyon walls of Blind Mesa a soft blood orange, Colt and Savannah stood atop a rocky ledge, surveying the narrow basin below. Tents, horses, campfire smoke rising in lazy coils, less than a dozen men. But one figure sat separate near the ridge, tall, broad-shouldered, and unmistakably Carrick. "He's here," Savannah whispered. Colt adjusted the scope on his rifle. "He looks comfortable." Savannah's mouth was a hard line. That's about to change. They had tracked the ridge in silence, flanking the camp for hours, memorizing movements. Carrick's men were looser now, no longer afraid, no longer watching their backs. "That was their mistake," Colt turned to her. "We do this smart, fast. You take the south slope. I come in from the east once they move toward you." Savannah nodded, checking the knife at her boot and the pistol at her hip. "Colt," she said just before she moved. He looked at her, steady. "If this goes bad, it won't. But if it does," she continued, "don't let them bury me nameless." He swallowed. "You won't fall, not today." She gave one sharp nod, then disappeared into the brush like a shadow. Minutes passed. Then, like clockwork, she emerged near the camp entrance, walking with the sure-footed silence of a hunter. Carrick stood when he saw her, lips curling into a wolfish grin. "Well now, look what the wind blew back." Savannah didn't blink. "I'm not here to talk, Carrick." He gestured at the others lazily. "You hear that, boys? She thinks she's gonna take on all of us alone." "Not alone." Carrick turned, too late. Colt's rifle cracked from the ridge. One of Carrick's men spun and dropped, hit square in the thigh. Another man reached for his pistol, but Savannah had already moved. 2 steps. 1 shot. Down. Chaos exploded in the canyon. Colt picked them off with clean, practiced aim, his position near invisible in the rocks. Savannah moved through the brush like fire, fast, unpredictable, and unrelenting. 3 men turned to flee. Carrick stayed. He pulled his gun and stalked toward Savannah, bellowing, "You were nothing but trouble! I gave you a place!" "You gave me chains," she shouted. They fired. Her shot struck first, right into his shoulder. He dropped to one knee, growling. She walked toward him, slow, unwavering. He reached for another weapon, hidden at his ankle, and Colt stepped in behind him, rifle pressed cold to his back. "Don't," Colt said. "You don't get to take anything else." Carrick froze. Savannah stopped in front of him. "You won't die today," she said, voice calm. "But you'll ride out of this canyon on a broken horse and with every man here knowing you were bested by the one you tried to break." Carrick's mouth twisted. "You think they'll follow you now?" "No," she said. "I don't need anyone to follow me. Just to stop following you." Colt cuffed Carrick's hands behind his back and tied him to his own horse. The rest of Carrick's men, scattered and wounded, didn't resist. They watched in stunned silence as the man they'd once feared was hauled away like any other thief. By noon, the canyon was empty again, and by dusk, Savannah stood back at the cabin's edge, watching the wind move through the grass. Colt joined her. "It's over." She nodded, but her eyes were distant. "I've waited so long to feel free," she said. "I didn't expect it to be so quiet." "Quiet's a gift," Colt replied. "Means you've finally got space to decide what comes next." She looked at him. "And if I decide to stay?" He took her hand without hesitation. "Then we build something louder than fear ever was." The weeks that followed were the slowest either of them had ever lived. And for once, that was a blessing. Carrick had been delivered to the authorities in Dry Creek, and though the sheriff wasn't a man Colt or Savannah fully trusted, the town had made their opinion loud and clear. He wasn't welcome back. His men scattered. Some drifted south. Others tried their hand at honest labor. But none returned. For the first time in a long while, peace didn't feel like a trap waiting to snap. Savannah spent her mornings walking the edge of the land, fingers brushing the tops of tall grass, pistol still on her hip, out of habit, not fear. Sometimes she'd stop at the garden, which had somehow survived the chaos. The carrots were stunted, the beans crooked, but they grew, and that was enough. Colt rebuilt the corral, this time wider. He'd bought 2 new colts from a trader passing through, both wild-eyed and stubborn. "Perfect," he said, "for a home built by fire and grit." One evening, as the sun slipped low behind the ridge, Savannah found Colt oiling the hinges on the front gate. "You're fixing things that didn't need fixing," she said. He gave her a small grin. "Just making it easier for when we open it next." She stepped closer. "Planning on company?" He looked at her, more serious now. "I'm planning on us having a reason to keep this place open. A future that doesn't begin and end with trouble." Savannah studied him for a moment. "You think we can have that?" "I don't know," Colt admitted. "But I know we deserve the chance to try." She nodded, quiet for a moment. Then gently, she pulled the silver locket from around her neck. the one Colt had once handed her beside the fire. "I never showed you what's inside," she said. She opened it. Inside was a small sketch, faded and worn from time. A woman with fierce eyes, not unlike Savannah's, holding a baby. Colt stared. "That's your mother?" he asked. Savannah shook her head. "No, it's mine." Colt blinked. "You never told me." "Didn't think it mattered. Not until now." She paused, then added, "My father left when I was 6. My mother raised me hard, said the world wouldn't give me anything soft, so I shouldn't expect it. But even she held me like I mattered." Colt nodded. "You do." Savannah took his hand, pressing the locket into his palm. "Then hold on to it for me," she said. "I think I'd rather build something new than carry everything old." They stood that way for a while, two people weathered by loss, choosing presence over memory, hope over habit. Later, they sat on the porch as the stars began to burn above them. Savannah leaned her head on Colt's shoulder. "You ever think about the fact that I was supposed to die in that desert?" He nodded. "I think about it every day." And I thank God the desert was wrong." She smiled then, real, unguarded. No threats in the dark, no boot steps on the wind, just the creak of a rocker, the hum of night birds, and two people who had finally, against every odd, chosen to stay. By midsummer, the land had changed. The rains had come early, softening the hard clay, coaxing wildflowers from the hills and green from the once dead garden rows. The air was sweeter now, laced with the scent of cedar and fresh hay. And on the ridge overlooking the valley, 2 horses stood tethered near a whitewashed fence, one saddle worn smooth from years of riding, the other nearly new. Colt stood by the barn, running his hand over a fresh brand burned into the side of one of the younger colts. It wasn't just a ranch mark anymore. It was theirs. An emblem Savannah had drawn herself, a rising sun caught between 2 mountain peaks. New beginnings held steady by the hard places they'd come through. He turned as Savannah approached, wiping her hands on a faded cloth. She wore her hat low, and her expression warm. "Fence is holding," she said. "Even the post I swore would fall." Colt smiled. "Guess things have a way of surprising us." She stepped closer. "Yeah, like peace, or people who don't leave." They stood in silence, looking out over the land. The cattle grazed without worry. The wind moved without threat. The ranch, once nearly lost, was full of signs of life. Savannah took a breath. "I never thought I'd want to stay anywhere. Not this long." "You've been here months." She looked at him. "Feels like years, in a good way." He nodded, eyes searching hers. "You still fierce?" She grinned. "Only when I have to be." "Good," Colt said, taking her hand. "Because I was thinking we should build something permanent." She raised a brow. "The barn's already standing." "I wasn't talking about the barn." Colt reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. From inside, he slid out a ring. Simple, silver, and carved with the same sun and mountain mark as their brand. Savannah froze. "I know this life won't ever be easy," Colt said. "There'll be storms, droughts, maybe worse. But I'd rather face them with you than wake up one more day wondering if you'll ride off without a word." She blinked, just once. "You think a ring makes me yours?" she asked. "No," he said. "I think it reminds us we chose each other, even when the trail got hard." She looked at the ring, then back at him. "I won't promise to always be calm or soft. I don't even know how to do that." "I don't want soft," Colt said. "I want you." Savannah exhaled. Her hands were calloused. Her past was jagged. Her heart had been broken and stitched back with steel. But Colt had never asked her to be anyone else. She slid the ring onto her finger. "Then let's build it. Not just fences and barns, let's build a life." He leaned in, kissed her like the first time, like the last time, like every time mattered. And in the weeks that followed, the townsfolk came up to the ranch one morning. Not for a trial or a fight, but a small ceremony under the cottonwoods. No preacher. Just a circle of witnesses and 2 people who had walked through fire and found shelter in each other. Savannah Gray became Savannah McAllister, but not because she gave anything up. She chose. And Colt, he gained more than a wife. He gained a partner. A fire that warmed instead of burned. A fierce soul who no longer needed to fight the world alone. Years later, the wind still moved across the ridge the same way, low and steady, like a whisper that remembered everything but never needed to say it aloud. The ranch had grown. 2 new barns stood where brush once gathered. Fences stretched farther, and the land bore rows of crops that Savannah had once claimed she'd never have the patience for. A small orchard took root beyond the corral. Apples, peaches, even a single stubborn pear tree that Colt swore wouldn't make it through the first freeze. But it had. Just like them. Savannah stood near the front gate, her hair streaked with silver now, though her eyes burned just the same, calm but never soft. She wore the same leather coat, repaired at the elbows, and a rifle slung across her back. Not because she needed it, but because it was part of her. Colt came up beside her, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Fence held through the storm," he said. Savannah sipped, then smirked. "Told you that 4th post wouldn't give." They stood for a moment, watching the horses graze, the clouds roll, the world turn slowly. "Remember the first day I showed up here?" she asked. "You mean collapsed half dead by the tree line, muttering threats between breaths?" Savannah chuckled. "That one." Colt leaned on the post, eyes warm. "You were a storm that day. And now?" He looked at her for a long time. "Now you're the sky, wild, full of weather, but mine." She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, a gesture she never would have allowed back then. Not when every touch had felt like a trap. Not when she'd still thought freedom meant being alone. "You think we made it?" she asked softly. Colt didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. He handed it to her. Inside was the silver locket. Worn, dulled by time, but still strong. "I kept it," he said, "even after you stopped wearing it." She opened it slowly. Inside was no longer just one drawing, but 2. Her mother's face remained, and beside it, a new sketch. A boy, maybe 7, with Savannah's eyes and Colt's stubborn jaw. Savannah blinked, her breath catching. "You drew him?" Colt nodded. "Had help. Amos's granddaughter's quite the artist now." Savannah looked out across the land. Their son was riding with the hands today, learning the difference between leading and pushing. Learning how to build, not just survive. "We did make it," she said. "Not because we got lucky," Colt added, "but because we chose it, every day." Savannah smiled then, a smile shaped by every scar, every mile, every refusal to quit. They had been forged in fire, but they stayed for love.